Welcome to Magical Bedtime Stories, your cozy escape into the world of soothing tales and dreamy adventures. The name's Elena, and if you've wandered into my office this late at night, it's clear you're after only one thing. You want a case, a gripping tale, the sort that seizes you by the collar and won't let go until dawn breaks over the city skyline. Sleeping Duke by Elizabeth Gilbert. The Mysterious Adventures of the Mayor's Daughter. Tonight, I've got just the ticket. We're about to venture into the murky backstreets of the city that never sleeps. Through a smoky fog shrouding a case that bears all the marks of a timeless mystery. Characters teetering on the brink, where right and wrong fuse into a blur. It's a story that reminds you why you keep coming back, even when the stakes are high and the risks are even higher. So, settle in, pour yourself a stiff drink if that's what you fancy, and let's plunge into a world where every shadow conceals a secret and every decision comes with a price tag. And if you feel inclined to toss a coin into the tip jar, it'll keep the lights buzzing in this detective's lair and ensure the stories keep flowing. Let's get moving. The city awaits. Now, hold on. Before we dip our toes in, I need you to do me a favor. Take a step back first. The city has this way of eating at you, tension gnawing away. And I can't have that in my office. It spoils the vibe, you know? Take a deep breath, like the first drag of a cigarette. Let it fill your lungs and watch the stress float away. We're about to embark on a little journey. Imagine a time when the city was just as brutal, just as fierce. Picture it. Shadows creeping up weathered brick walls, neon lights flickering as if sharing a secret, and the scent of rain-drenched concrete in the breeze. Hear the rumble of a distant subway, the sound of footsteps splashing on slick sidewalk. Lose yourself in the soft hum of a late-night jazz tune drifting from a smoky bar. It's all there, waiting for you to soak it in. Now that you're ready, come back, take a seat, and tell me precisely what went down. Charlie Bennet slouched at his desk, the leather groaning as he leaned back, letting the shadows of his office envelop him like an old, familiar cloak. He was a broad-shouldered man, the type who looked like he could handle a punch, and had likely taken his fair share. His hair, a tousled mess of dark brown flecked with silver, was long overdue for some attention. His stubble had morphed into a rough facade. Once sharp, his suit now hung loosely on his frame, fabric rumpled and threadbare at the elbows. just as tired as he was. His hazel eyes were bloodshot, framed by shadows that told tales of countless sleepless nights. A cigarette dangled from his fingers, barely holding onto its last remnants of tobacco. The place was a dump, mirroring his own state. Paint was peeling off the walls. The ceiling fan creaked more than it turned. And stale, cheap booze lingered in the air like a bad hangover. The blinds were half drawn, letting in slivers of the city's neon pulse, while keeping the outside world at bay. The frosted glass of his door, etched with P.I. Charlie Bennet in fading letters, was cracked, offering little in the way of privacy or protection. The bottle of bourbon on his desk was more empty than full, but that didn't stop him from reaching for it. Hales. He tipped it back, savoring the burn when the phone rang out. Loud and grating in the silent room. He let it ring for a while, contemplating whether he could muster the energy to answer. But old habits die hard. Finally, he picked up the receiver. His voice was a gravelly croak. "Ben in us?" "Charlie, it's Rye," came a familiar voice, echoing memories of better days. She remembered looking forward to a week where she could finally go to the gallery. Ray Nonavan, a cop Charlie used to run with, back before he lost faith in things like right and wrong. "What do you want?" Charlie asked, his stomach tightening at the thought of the conversation. He rubbed his eyes, attempting to dispel the fog that had settled over him. "There's been a murder, Charlie. A really nasty one. Laura Sinclair, a wealthy dame, found strangled in her Upper East Side penthouse. Jeanette Baxter thought the first few minutes went away. You need to get there before the boys in blue show up. The Upper East Side. Charlie had no business being in those parts." She refused to move. Yet, Rye always had a knack for making it tough to say no. With a grunt, he hung up and pushed himself to his feet. He grabbed his coat, the fabric worn and frayed at the edges, and checked his revolver, his old companion, cold and dependable. Stepping outside, the city greeted him like an old rival. He flagged down a taxi, the driver barely giving him a second glance before pulling over. Charlie slid into the back seat. A wave of stale cigarettes and something unpleasant hitting him as he told the driver the address. As the cab pulled away from the curb, Charlie gazed out at the city rolling by. The stark contrast from the grimy underbelly where he dwelled to the polished streets of the Upper East Side was shocking, like flipping a switch. The buildings grew taller, brighter, their facades gleaming under the streetlights. Sidewalks were adorned with trees, their leaves whispering softly in the evening breeze. The people who walked them were from a different universe, far removed from the drunks and lowlifes Charlie typically dealt with. Here, it was all finely tailored suits, sparkling jewelry, and the silent hum of wealth. When the cab pulled up in front of the building, Charlie couldn't suppress a low whistle. It was a fortress of glass and steel, with the doorman standing sentinel, like his own personal guard. The cabbie eyed him in the rear-view mirror, suspicion flickering in his gaze, as if questioning what a guy like him was doing in such a place. Charlie tossed a handful of crumpled bills at him and stepped into the cool air, which hit him like a slap. Inside, the lobby was all marble and soft lighting. A chandelier hanging overhead that likely cost more than Charlie's lifetime earnings. He felt out of place, but then again, so did death. And it didn't care about exclusivity. Charlie rode the elevator up, the quiet only interrupted by the faint murmur of classical music playing from hidden speakers. When the doors slid open, he stepped into a hallway finished in polished wood and lined with plush carpets. The penthouse awaited him at the end, its door ajar, a telltale sign of the chaos that had likely erupted only hours before. The penthouse itself looked ripped from the pages of a glossy magazine, a realm where every item was in its perfect spot, radiating opulence. The furniture boasted a sleek, modern aesthetic pieces that seemed too pristine for daily use, meant only for admiration. Art decorated the walls, masterpieces Charlie couldn't even begin to decipher, and the view through the floor-to-ceiling windows was breathtaking, a sweeping panorama of the twinkling skyline. Yet none of that mattered at that moment. What mattered was the dark crimson staining the carpet, the thick pool of blood gathered around the body of Laura Sinclair. Charlie edged closer, his eyes narrowing as he took in the grim scene. Laura lay sprawled on the floor, an empty glass nearby, a lipstick-stained rim, a mute witness to her final moments. A silk tie tossed carelessly on a chair looked like it had been yanked off in despair. Charlie crouched, lifting it cautiously with gloved hands. Smooth and expensive, it was a Bellamy silk, an item that catered to the affluent, something you wouldn't find just anywhere, and that made it significant. He examined her body, but it revealed no secrets he hadn't already pieced together. Charlie continued ransacking the apartment, taking his time on every single detail. A life of luxury had been shattered, reduced to mere evidence. It wasn't until he sifted through a stack of magazines on the coffee table that he stumbled upon something worthwhile. A well-worn, leather-bound journal. Its pages were filled with meticulous handwriting, and toward the back, folded within the pages, he unearthed a letter. Lay low, it read in flowing script, but soon we'll escape together. Just like we always dreamed. Charlie frowned. flipping over the letter in his hands. B. This was the first genuine lead, yet it raised more questions than it resolved. After a while of searching, Charlie had collected all he could. He stepped back into the hallway and lit a cigarette. The smoke curled upward, disappearing into the ceiling, like the answers he was desperate to find. He didn't have much to go on, but he knew enough to understand this case was bound to drag him through the muck, and the Upper East Side was only the beginning. He needed to find someone, a potential witness, who might have seen or heard something. The building's residents likely reveled in their affluence, maintaining a wall of silence around their lives. Yet in places like this, secrets tended to seep out. He began his inquiries with the neighbor across the hall. The door was old and imposing, the kind you couldn't push open unless you knew someone inside. After a long moment, he knocked, his raps reverberating through the still hall, then waited. Moments later, the door creaked open to reveal a man who appeared to have just rolled out of bed, disheveled, unshaven, with the unmistakable scent of booze hanging around him. The man looked like he was struggling to stay upright. His shirt hung carelessly from his frame, as if the very fabric had given up on being neat. "Eh?" the man slurred, blinking vacantly at Charlie. "Charlie Bennet," he said, flashing his old agency card. While it didn't hold much weight these days, it still packed a punch. "I'm looking into what happened to your neighbor, Laura Sinclair." The man blinked again, slowly piecing the puzzle together. "You a cop?" "Not a cop," Charlie replied, keeping his tone even. "Just trying to dig up some answers." Leaning against the doorframe, the man ran a hand through his greasy, unkempt hair. "Laura? Shame, really, she was a looker." Charlie fought back an eye roll. "Did you notice or hear anything unusual over the last few days?" The man shook his head, but then paused, as if deliberating. "Well, now that you mention it, I did hear some ruckus late last night. Thought it was just the usual noise, but who knows? I was pretty out of it." Charlie nodded, sensing this guy was either telling the truth or recounting whatever scraps he could muster. In the silence, Charlie finally lowered herself to the ground, allowing the guy to release her from the tree. "Anything else? Any visitors passing through?" "Maybe." The man squinted as if rummaging through his foggy memory. "No. Can't say I saw anyone. But there's been some strange stuff lately. Bits and pieces going missing. Bits and pieces going missing. Bits and pieces going missing. Could be connected. Could be not." The inebriated man shifted, trying to appear credible. If you buy me a bottle, I might recall a few more details." Charlie raised an eyebrow, brushing the man off as he continued down the hallway. It wasn't much, but it was at least something, and something was always better than nothing. Mindfully, I took another breath and tried to center myself. At the next door, he knocked again, this time greeted almost instantly by a woman who seemed poised for a conversation. The woman was middle-aged, her face layered in too much makeup, a cigarette hanging from her fingers. Her eyes were keen, taking in every detail of Charlie, as if assessing him on the spot. Her long nails tapped rhythmically against the door frame. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice rough from years of smoking. He introduced himself again, saying, "I'm investigating the murder of Laura Sinclair." He stretched out his hand toward the kitchen and looked her in the eye. The woman's eyes widened slightly, though she didn't appear shocked. "Let me introduce myself and my directions." "I knew it," she muttered to herself, more than to Charlie. "I had a feeling something like this would happen. This building's gone downhill." Charlie crossed his arms, playing the part. "What leads you to believe that?" The woman took a long drag from her cigarette, letting the smoke curl between them like a lingering memory. "This place used to have some class, you know, but now it's all gone to hell." People coming and going at all hours, strange men hanging around, and don't even get me started on the thefts. "Thievery?" Charlie asked, recalling his earlier conversation with the drunken neighbor. "Oh, yes," she replied, nodding vigorously. "It started with little things, but now it feels like someone's playing a game." I've lost 2 rings and a bracelet, and the management hasn't done a damn thing about it." Charlie nodded, tucking that information away for later. It seemed the strange thefts were part of a larger pattern, not just happenstance. "Did you know Laura Sinclair?" he probed. The woman shrugged, flicking ashes onto the floor. "Only really, she kept to herself mostly. But you could tell she had money, always dressed to the nines, and sneaking back up here at dawn." "Thanks," Charlie said, offering her a small nod of appreciation as he turned to leave. But the woman called out, "Hey, if you find out who's behind this, make sure they get what's coming to them. Will you? This place used to be nice." Charlie managed a half smile and blew my best. Just as he was about to head back down, the sound of soft footsteps caught his attention. He turned to see an older woman approaching him, concern etched across her face. She was short and craned her neck to look up at him. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice trembling slightly with age. "You wouldn't happen to be Detective, would you? I'm not a cop, if that's what you're after, he replied. But what do you need? He glanced at his watch, wondering if he had time to spare. The woman grasped his arm, her grip surprisingly strong for her years, and guided him down the hallway. It's my cat, Valentino. He's gone missing, a beautiful Persian, white as snow. He hasn't been around for a couple of days now, and I'm worried something's happened to him. Charlie sighed. The last thing he wanted was to go on a wild goose chase for some old woman's cat for free, but with no concrete leads in the Sinclair case, and considering he had a soft spot for animals, he decided to follow her. She led him to her apartment, which was richly decorated with plush carpets, expensive furniture, and an air of refinement that spoke of old money. The cat's room, as she called it, was more lavish than most people's living spaces. A plush cushion in the corner, toys scattered around, and an ornate chandelier dangling from the ceiling. Predictably, Charlie found nothing of interest in the woman's apartment. Feeling stumped for the second time that night, he decided he needed to clear his head. Stepping out onto the balcony for a smoke, the city sprawled below him, a sea of lights and distant noise. His silver lighter clicked open, its flame flaring briefly in the darkness before settling into a steady burn as he brought the cigarette to his lips. The end caught fire with a soft crackle. It was then he caught a whiff of something unusual, something fishy. Literally, the smell was pungent, wafting up from below. Charlie leaned over the railing, scanning the street below. A French restaurant, a bit run down compared to its upscale neighbors, was closing up for the night. The owner, a stocky man with a bushy mustache, stepped out the back door, holding a bowl of something that looked like pâté. Charlie watched as the man set the bowl down by the steps and went back inside. Moments later, a fluffy white cat appeared, drawn to the enticing aroma. Charlie couldn't help but smile as he realized he'd found Valentino. He made his way down to the alley and gently picked up the cat, who purred contentedly as Charlie scratched behind its ears. Back in the elderly woman's apartment, he handed over the cat, and it immediately curled up on its plush cushion, as if nothing had happened. Looks like Valentino has a taste for the finer things, Charlie said dryly, watching the cat settle in. The woman beamed, overjoyed to have her pet back. Thank you so much, Mr. Bennet. Would you care for a cup of tea? As a thank you, Charlie politely declined, glancing around the room. That's when he noticed something odd. Small items scattered around that seemed out of place. A fancy cigarette case, a pair of cufflinks, even a bracelet. Charlie smirked, bending down to pet Valentino one last time. "So you're the little thief," he murmured, amused, but his hand froze when he noticed the initials on the cigarette case. He slipped the case into his pocket, his mind reeling like the city at midnight. The logo etched on its surface was a blooming black dahlia, belonging to one of the hottest joints in town, the kind of place where secrets were poured as freely as the drinks. He finally had a lead, a thread to pull on, and maybe, just maybe, it would unravel the whole tangled mess. And suddenly, there was a light at the end of the tunnel. By the time Charlie Bennet trudged back to his office, the night had wrapped its cold fingers around the city. The familiar creak of the wooden floor welcomed him as he pushed open the door with the frosted glass window. It wasn't much, but it was home, or at least the closest thing he had. He tossed his coat over the back of his chair and dropped the cigarette case onto the desk. The black dahlia. Charlie had heard whispers about the place, a nightclub that catered to the elite. They were the kind of people he didn't know much about and wanted to know even less. Charlie knew he needed more information, and there was only one person he trusted to help him get it. He would call Rye tomorrow. The couch groaned as he collapsed onto it, the rough fabric scratching at his skin. But it didn't matter. His eyes shut, and he was drawn into a restless, uneasy dreamscape where the shadows whispered secrets he wasn't ready to uncover. Charlie woke with a start as sunlight streamed in through the cracked blinds, cutting through the haze in his head. Rubbing his eyes, he tried to shake off the remnants of sleep. The clock on the wall ticked away quietly, and he squinted at it, trying to discern the time. He sat up slowly, muscles stiff from a night spent on the lumpy couch. The room was bathed in the harsh light of day, making everything appear even more run down than usual. He desperately needed coffee. But first, he had to make a call. Dragging himself over to the desk, he picked up the receiver and dialed Ray Dononiman's number. The phone rang twice before Rye answered, his voice rough from long nights on the job. "Charlie?" Charlie leaned back in his chair, lighting a cigarette. The familiar burn in his throat felt like a welcome anchor in the present. "We need to talk." There was a pause on the other end, the kind that comes when someone isn't sure they want to hear what's coming next. "You sound like hell." "Feel like it too," Charlie replied with a grim chuckle. "I've got a lead, but I need some information. Meet me at Lucky's Diner in half an hour. Charlie hung up and took a moment to gather himself. He wasn't in any shape to chase down leads, but the luxury of waiting was not an option. The city didn't pause just because he was tired, and neither could he. After splashing some water on his face in the dingy bathroom at the back of the office, Charlie grabbed his coat and headed out. The streets were teeming with life again. People oblivious to the darkness lurking just beneath the surface. but Charlie sensed it, felt it, in the way the shadows clung to the corners, the way the city seemed to breathe with a life of its own. Lucky's Diner was a haven of normalcy in the chaos, its chrome trim and neon sign preserving some charm amid the city's relentless march forward. The familiar scent of frying bacon and brewing coffee hit Charlie as soon as he opened the door. The checkered floors were scuffed from years of footsteps, and the red vinyl booths had seen better days. But there was something comforting about how familiar it all felt. The diner was busy, filled with a lunchtime crowd, office workers, blue-collar guys on break, and the occasional cop grabbing a quick bite. Charlie spotted Ray in their usual booth, a cup of coffee already in front of him. Ray Donovan was a mountain of a man, built like a linebacker, with a square jaw and eyes that had seen too much. His dark hair was streaked with gray, and there were new lines on his face that hadn't been there the last time they met. He was a man who still believed in some semblance of honor in a world that had long since lost its moral compass. Slowly, lowing, Charlie slid into the booth across from him, nodding a greeting as he picked up the menu. The waitress, Doris, a woman who'd been working at Lucky's since forever, came over with a pot of coffee. "What'll it be, hun?" she asked, her tone friendly, yet distracted by the lunchtime rush. "Coffee black," Charlie replied, setting the menu aside, "and a piece of apple pie." The waitress nodded and poured him a cup before heading to another table. Charlie took a long sip, letting the bitter liquid wake him further. He pulled the cigarette case out of his pocket and slid it across the table to Ray. "Found this in the dame's neighbor's apartment." The cat swiped it. Look at the engraving." Rye picked up the case, his brow furrowing as he examined it. "The Black Dahlia? Haven't heard that name in a while." Charlie glanced around and lowered his voice. "I need to know who runs the place and what's going on there." Ray set the case down, his expression serious. "I've heard enough to know it's bad news. The boys on the force look the other way. They don't like when the name comes up, especially without evidence." Charlie nodded, already suspecting as much. Laura Sinclair was strangled with a silk tie. Bellamy silks, top-tier stuff. I need to know who she was involved with and who's behind this. Doris arrived and slid the plate of apple pie in front of him with a smile. Charlie dug in, letting the sweet taste distract him, if only for a moment. Ray sighed, rubbing a hand over his stubbled jaw. "I know a guy. Jimmy the Rat Marone. He's a low-life informant, but has his ear to the ground. He works for some heavy hitters." "Who's heavy hitters?" "If anyone knows what's going on, it's him." Charlie took another sip of his coffee, letting the information sink in. "Where can I find him?" Ray leaned in, grabbing a forkful of pie, despite Charlie's protests. Last I heard, he was hanging around an alley near the Brass Knuckle. It's a dive bar on the edge of town. Jimmy's not the type to talk easily, and the people he's mixed up with don't like loose ends. Charlie finished his meal and tossed a few bills onto the table. I'll get him to talk. The rain began to fall as they made their way through the city, transitioning from the more respectable parts to the shady underbelly, where crime and desperation lurked at every corner. The alleyways grew narrower, the buildings more dilapidated, and the people they passed became less inclined to make eye contact. They clutched their wallets close, fully aware the streets here had a way of taking what wasn't nailed down. The alley near the Brass Knuckle was a collection point for the city's filth. The dark, narrow stretch of pavement that reeked of garbage and something rotting. The neon lights flickered overhead, casting a sickly glow on the cracked asphalt. Liam returned to the restaurant and proceeded to walk to the front door. It was the sort of place that made your skin crawl and your hand itch for the gun stowed away in your coat. As they delved deeper into the alley, they passed a woman propped against the wall. Her heavy makeup smudged, and her clothes a size too small. She eyed them with interest, a suggestive smile playing on her lips. Charlie shook his head, peremptorily dismissing her as they pushed past. Her interest faded as they continued down the alley. Ray led the way, scanning the shadows for any sign of their target. They spotted Jimmy the Rat Marone at the far end, hunched over in the middle of a shady deal. The moment he saw them, his eyes widened, and he muttered a curse under his breath before making a break for it. "Damn it, Jimmy!" Ray shouted as they both took off in pursuit. The chase was brief, but intense. Jimmy was quick, but fear made him reckless. He tripped over a pile of crates, and before he could recover, Charlie and Ray tackled him to the ground. Charlie hoisted Jimmy up by the collar, shoving him against the wall. The man wheezed, his eyes darting around in panic. "I don't know nothing," he protested, his voice trembling. Charlie's patience was already wearing thin. "That's funny, considering I haven't even told you what I'm after yet. Now you're going to tell me about the Black Dahlia. Who's running the place, and what goes on there, Grateful?" "I don't know," Jimmy insisted, squirming to break free. But Charlie wasn't in the mood for games. He yanked him closer, his fist connecting with Jimmy's gut. Jimmy doubled over, gasping for air. "Cops aren't supposed to hit people for no reason," he wheezed, clutching his stomach. "Good thing I'm not a cop," Charlie growled, delivering another punch. Ray leaned against the alley wall, lighting a cigarette, watching the whole scene unfold with a calm detachment. The smoke from his cigarette curled up into the air. Eventually, Jimmy's fear outweighed his loyalty. "Right, there's dark stuff going on at the club, but I don't know who's behind it. I'm just a small fry." If you want to know more, talk to the working girls there. They know the score better than anyone. Jimmy laughed bitterly, spitting out a bit of blood onto the ground. That you're wasting your time. They won't talk to anyone they don't know. Charlie released Jimmy, shoving him away in disgust. Get out of here before I change my mind. Jimmy staggered back, casting a hateful glance at Ray, before disappearing into the shadows. Ray exhaled slowly, taking a long drag from his cigarette as he watched Jimmy leave. Well, that was enlightening, he remarked dryly, pushing off the wall and crushing his cigarette underfoot. Charlie grunted, his mind already processing the next steps. The Black Dahlia increasingly looked like the key to unraveling the entire mess, and if he wanted real answers, he'd have to plunge into its depths, whether he liked it or not. He thanked Ray for the help, and the two parted ways on an unusually good note. A rare occurrence in a city that had a knack for turning friends into enemies. Monica made herself take a long, deep breath, inhaling the sensations of her waves rushing past her window. Charlie traversed the city, the night thick and suffocating, as if it threatened to swallow him whole. Steam curled up from the grates, tendrils wrapping around his legs, as if the streets themselves were alive, attempting to halt his progress. The rain had left everything slick, the pavement gleaming under the dim streetlights. Cars rumbled by, their headlights cutting through the fog like ghosts. Mere shapes, barely there, part of the city's illusion. The exterior of the Black Dahlia was understated, too understated. It didn't need to advertise its secrets, because the people who mattered already knew. Once inside, he pulled his coat tight against the chill in the air. Immediately, his senses were bombarded by the scent of cigars and expensive perfume. The interior was a world apart from the outside. Plush, decadent, with low lighting that imparted an air of danger. Charlie navigated through the crowd inconspicuously. It wasn't too busy yet, just a slow trickle of well-heeled gentlemen and elegantly dressed women, their laughter and conversations creating a soft murmur beneath the smooth jazz rising from the stage. This place was where money exchanged hands, where deals were sealed with a smile and a handshake, and where the wrong question could land you in hot water faster than you could finish your drink. Charlie approached the bar, where a few girls were gathered, their eyes flicking over him with a casual disinterest. He wasn't there to draw attention. He just wanted to listen and see if anyone knew something they shouldn't. One woman caught his eye, not simply for her looks, though beautiful, but for the way she carried herself. Rich auburn hair fell around her shoulders, deep green eyes that had seen too much, and an attitude that made it clear she wasn't here to play nice. "Evening," Charlie said, leaning against the bar, keeping his voice low. She looked over, her green eyes briefly meeting his. "You don't look like the usual type we get in here. First time?" he admitted, offering a small smile. "Figured I'd check out the fuss. Name's Charlie." She scrutinized him for a long moment, seeing through his attempt to blend in. Then she scoffed and turned away, her auburn hair swaying as she walked back to join the other girls. Charlie watched her go, frustration and curiosity gnawing at him. She knew something, he was sure of it, but getting her to spill would take more than a few smooth words. "Ha ha ha." She laughed, and then he found a booth in the corner, away from prying eyes, and settled in. The night was starting to pick up. The club filling with people who had money to burn and secrets to protect. The band began to play anew, and the lead singer, a woman in her 30s with a voice as smooth as velvet, stepped up to the microphone. Her eyes were half closed as she sang, her voice gliding effortlessly over the notes, wrapping around the room like a warm embrace. Charlie leaned back, letting the music wash over him as he observed the crowd. The singer had a presence, a way of drawing you in with every note. A voice brimmed with rich emotion, seemingly emerging from someplace deep within, somewhere utterly real. She was exceptional. Far too good for a place like this. But then again, that was the point, wasn't it? The finest things often found themselves in the worst spots. As the song wrapped up, the room broke into polite applause. Charlie took one last drag from his cigarette, the smoke curling lazily up toward the dim lights. And then, she smiled ruefully, he stubbed it out in the ashtray, reflecting that he hadn't learned much tonight. But he hadn't really expected to. This place was a fortress. Getting in would require more than just a single visit. Just as he was about to slip out and try his luck another night, a piercing scream cut through the air. It was sharp and panicked, sending a surge of adrenaline coursing through him. The club erupted into chaos. The performers who had been lounging near the stage now fleeing, their faces pale with fear. Charlie sprang to his feet, pushing through the throng, his heart racing in his chest. The backstage area was a disaster. Chairs upended, makeup strewn across the floor, but all that faded when he saw her, the singer, crumpled in the corner of her dressing room. Her body twisted, her once beautiful face twisted into a grotesque mask of pain and terror. Around her neck was a silk tie, biting into her skin, a telltale sign. Charlie knelt beside her, his mind racing. The same brand, Bellamy Silks. 2 murders, 1 night apart, both bearing the same chilling trademark. One in the houses of Manhattan, the other in the pillars of the Capitol building. This wasn't just a murder. It was a statement, He rose to his feet, scanning the room for any hint that might uncover a clue, but there was nothing. Whoever did this had covered their tracks well. He needed to get out of here before the cops arrived and turned everything upside down. Charlie slipped out the back, leaning against the wall, trying to catch his breath and make sense of the madness unfolding around him. He lit another cigarette. The flame flickered in the darkness. Just as he was about to leave, he saw her, the auburn-haired woman from earlier. She stood a few feet away, her face stained with tears, her body trembling. She looked up and met his gaze. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. "I never did get your name," Charlie said, his voice rough from smoke and tension. She wiped at her eyes, trying to steady herself. "Well, I never told you," she replied. Charlie took a step closer, his tone softening. "You need to help me. This is bigger than just one girl. We need to find out who's behind it." She hesitated, searching his face for something. "Why should I trust you?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Because I'm the only one who will actually do something about this." "You know the cops don't care," Charlie replied. She looked away, fists clenched at her sides, before finally nodding, with a look of resignation in her eyes. "All right, I'll help you." Charlie offered her a small, reassuring smile. "What's your name?" "Effie Fontaine. Let's go back to my place. I'll tell you what I know. It's not safe here." She trembled slightly in the night air. The city was alive with the muted mystery of nighttime. Charlie and Effie walked side by side, the streets unfolding before them like a map of secrets. The cool air carried the scents of the city: gasoline, street food, and a hint of something metallic and unplaceable. It was quieter now, the daytime hustle replaced by the night crowd. Men in sharp suits headed to late-night meetings, women in furs and silk, their laughter drifting like a melody. Lai de Nanghem. Occasionally, a passerby gave them a curious glance, but most kept to themselves, lost in their own thoughts. Effie led the way, her pace brisk, and her demeanor tense. "Not far now," she muttered, mostly to herself. Charlie nodded, though she wasn't looking at him. "Nice place." Effie let out a humorless laugh. They turned down a narrow side street, one most people wouldn't even notice unless they were looking for it. The buildings here were older, more worn. A cat slinked by, its eyes glinting warily as it vanished into the shadows. Effie slowed as they approached a brick building that had definitely seen better days. The fire escape clung to its side like a rusted skeleton. Still sturdy enough to climb, she paused, glancing up at the darkened windows. "We're going up this way," she said, nodding toward the fire escape. "The landlord is a creep, and I'm behind on rent. If he sees me coming in, he'll find some excuse to try to talk to me." Charlie raised an eyebrow, but didn't argue. "Lead the way." Effie grabbed hold of the ladder, her movements quick and practiced. Charlie followed, the metal creaking slightly under their weight. The climb wasn't long, just a couple of stories, but by the time they reached the top, Charlie felt the burn in his muscles. Effie pushed open a window, climbing through into a small, dimly lit apartment. It was modest, to say the least. One room serving as living area, kitchen, and bedroom, with mismatched furniture and empty takeout boxes. A single lamp cast a golden glow over everything, making it feel almost cozy, despite evident signs of neglect. And like I said, it's not much. Smoke. Smoke. He took the chair, settling into it with a grateful sigh. "I'm in no position to complain. My place makes this look like a fancy hotel suite." Effie busied herself at a small counter, pouring 2 drinks from a half-empty bottle of whiskey. "I don't usually bring strangers home," she said, handing him a glass. "That you don't seem like the type to cause trouble." Charlie sipped the whiskey, the burn warming him from the inside out. "Think." Effie leaned against the counter, her gaze distant for a moment. "You want to know about the Black Dahlia? About what really goes on there?" Charlie nodded. "There's an underground speakeasy at the club," she began, her voice steady but laced with bitterness. "It's where all the real deals happen. Gambling, drugs, you name it. The people who run it aren't the type you cross lightly, and the man in charge, whoever he is a ghost. No one knows his name, what he looks like. Nothing. He works from the shadows and lets others do his dirty work." Charlie leaned forward, running a hand through his unkempt hair in disbelief. "And the cops? They just let it slide?" Effie's lips twisted into a grim smile. "There's a crooked cop on the payroll, leaving him counting cash as he walks through the dressing rooms, leering at the girls. He's got them all scared. No one wants to end up like Vivian." "Vivian?" Charlie repeated, feeling a knot tighten in his chest. "The singer?" Vivian Hayes. She was one of the best. Hell, half the regulars only came to catch a glimpse of her. She kept the place running and the money flowing, but she was tired, tried to quit a few times, said she was done with the whole thing, but every time she went downstairs to talk to the boss, she'd come back crying. She was seeing someone, I think. had that far-off look in her eye sometimes, but wouldn't tell me who. Charlie rubbed the back of his neck. Exhaustion creeping in, but he pushed it aside, and now she's dead. Effie took a long drink, staring into the distance, as if she could see Vivian's face in the shadows. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence hung heavily around them. Effie broke it first, her voice softer, vulnerable. "Stay the night, Charlie. I don't, Charlie looked at her, seeing the fear and weariness she struggled to hide. He nodded slowly. "I thought you didn't like cops," Charlie teased, trying to lighten the mood. Effie's smile widened just a bit, a glimmer of playfulness returning to her eyes. "I thought you said you weren't a cop." "Got me there." The tension between them eased slightly, the shared burden of the night making them feel united. For a moment, the weight of the world seemed to lighten, and they both felt the faintest flicker of hope. Hope that perhaps they could get through this. Effie finished her drink and set the glass down. Moving toward the bed, "You can take the couch." "It's not much, but it's better than the floor." Charlie watched as she climbed into bed and pulled the thin blanket over her. He waited until he was sure she was asleep, then quietly rose from the couch. He made his way to the small kitchen. The light above the sink flickered slightly as he leaned against the counter. Opening the fridge, he pulled out a box of cold pizza. The leftover slices were stiff and a bit dry, but they'd do. He grabbed a piece, took a bite, and let the bland taste fill the emptiness in his stomach. The world outside was silent now, save for the occasional distant rumble of a car or the faint echo of a siren far off in the city. They walked now. Charlie lit a cigarette, taking a long drag as he chewed on the pizza. The night had been a whirlwind, but now, in the quiet solitude of Effie's tiny apartment, he could begin piecing it all together. Laura Sinclair, the initials on the letter, Vivian Hayes, the Black Dahlia. Laura must have been a regular at the club, drawn into the underground speakeasy, where stakes were high and losses even higher. Gambling deaths could pile up faster than the chips on the table. Once you were in deep, there was no getting out, especially when the man holding your deaths had a stranglehold on half the city. Charlie could picture it now. Laura, desperate and cornered, seeking a way out. And then there was Vivian. The two women must have crossed paths at the club, perhaps even more than once. They probably shared more than just drinks and casual conversations. Maybe even found a kindred spirit in each other. Two women ensnared in a web of lies and deceit, searching for a means of escape. It wasn't hard to imagine their friendship blooming into something deeper. Vivian was tired. That much was clear from what Effie had told him. Maybe she and Laura had concocted a plan, a plan to break free from the grip of the man who had them both trapped. But something had gone wrong. Someone had found out. And now both were dead. Charlie crushed the cigarette in the ashtray, the gears in his mind turning over the possibilities. The man behind this all, the shadowy figure orchestrating the speakeasy, pulling strings from the darkness. He was the key. If Charlie could get closer, he could discover who this man was and bring him down. But to do that, he'd need to infiltrate the inner workings of the club. The following morning, Charlie woke with a pounding headache, his neck stiff from where he'd fallen asleep against the kitchen counter. His leg was stiff, his face pale, his body. The empty pizza box remained on the table, and the ashtray was full of spent cigarette butts. Effie was already up, seated at the small table with a cup of coffee in hand. She looked over at him, her eyes still heavy with sleep, but with an underlying determination. "Morning," she said softly. "Morning," Charlie replied, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "I need a favor, Effie." Effie regarded him warily, setting her cup down. "What kind of favor?" Charlie took a deep breath, choosing his words with care. "I need to get into the speakeasy at the Black Dahlia, disguised as a bartender." Effie's eyes widened as apprehension flickered across her face. "Charlie, that's dangerous. If they find out who you are..." "I know," Charlie interrupted gently, "but it's the only way. I need to find out who's behind this." Effie bit her lip, fingers drumming against the table as she weighed his request. Finally, she sighed, looking up at him with resignation. "I'm tired, Charlie. Tired of living in fear. Tired of depending on a crime lord just to get by. Stay focused. Stay centered. Plus your soul. The club used to be something else. Something good. I want that back. I want it to be legit. A real business." She looked at him for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Right. I'll help you, but you need to be careful. These people don't play around." "Neither do I," Charlie replied, a steely edge to his voice. Later that day, Effie led him through the back streets, staying within the shadows as they approached the Black Dahlia. The sun dipped low in the sky, and the city began to awaken for the night. The streets slowly filled with the usual crowd, people in search of excitement, trouble, a moment of escape from their realities. Effie guided Charlie through a narrow alley behind the club, stopping at a heavy, unmarked door. She knocked 3 times, and the door creaked open. A burly man with a scar across his cheek peered out, his eyes narrowing at the sight of Charlie. "This him?" The man grunted. "Yeah, he's good. Effie replied smoothly, her voice carrying an authority Charlie hadn't heard before. "It is here to help out tonight." "It is here." The man scrutinized Charlie for a moment longer before stepping aside, allowing them both to enter. The door closed behind them with a heavy thud, plunging them into a long hallway. The sounds of muffled music and laughter echoed through the walls, growing louder as they made their way deeper into the club. Effie led Charlie through a maze of corridors, past rooms where the real business of the Black Dahlia unfolded, rooms filled with card games, dice, and whispered deals that could make or break a man. The sharp scent of expensive liquor infused the air, a heady brew that seemed to pulse with the club's heartbeat. Finally, they reached the speakeasy, a hidden room tucked away behind a false wall. It was a sharp contrast to the rest of the club, smaller, more intimate, yet just as luxurious. The bar was polished to a high shine. The bottles behind it reflected the low light in a myriad of shades of amber and gold. The patrons here were different too, sharper, more dangerous. These were the people who knew the game, who played for keeps. Effie handed Charlie a bartender's apron, her expression serious. "Just keep your head down, serve the drinks, and listen. Don't do anything to draw attention." Charlie nodded, slipping the apron on and stepping behind the bar. The role came naturally. After all, a bartender was just another kind of listener, someone who absorbed the secrets people were too drunk or too arrogant to keep hidden. As the night wore on, Charlie served drinks with relative ease, his ears attuned for any hint of the man he was hunting. He made small talk with the patrons while keeping a watchful eye on the room, searching for clues. He noticed nervous glances, tight smiles that never reached the eyes, the way some men leaned in a little too close when they spoke, as if wary of being overheard. Money flowed freely, liquor even more so, but an undercurrent of fear lurked beneath the surface, one that no amount of alcohol could drown out. Charlie observed how the servers moved, the girls working the room with practiced grace. They weren't just serving drinks, they were listening, taking note of every exchange. They were part of the fabric of this place. Then there were the men sitting in the shadows, those who rarely raised their voices, who hardly moved at all. They held the power, controlling the flow of the night with a nod or shake of the head, signaling the end of conversations, the closure of deals. Just as the night began to wane, a man approached the bar, commanding attention without uttering a word. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and had a presence that filled the room. His thick hair, streaked with silver, was slicked back with meticulous precision, enhancing the air of authority surrounding him. His face was angular, high cheekbones and a strong jaw. There was a certain hardness to his expression, softened only slightly by faint lines at the corners of his sharp, dark eyes. Eyes that missed nothing. He was impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that hugged his frame, as if it were made for him. The suit was a deep, charcoal gray, the fabric so fine it absorbed the dim light, giving him an almost shadowy quality. His shirt was crisp white, with cufflinks that glinted gold with every gesture, but it was his tie that really drew Charlie's attention. A deep, rich blue with a subtle sheen that hinted at the quality of the silk. And suddenly, the silk glowed with its own. This tie wasn't just an accessory. It was a statement. Charlie maintained a neutral expression as he poured the man's drink, careful not to betray that he had already marked him as someone significant. "Evening," Charlie said, his tone casual as he handed over the glass. That's a sharp tie you've got there. Looks like it's worth more than my whole wardrobe." The man glanced down at his tie, a faint, knowing smile curling his lips. "You've got a good eye," he replied, his voice deep and smooth with a slight rasp that suggested years of whiskey and cigars. "It's Bellamy silks. They don't make them like this anymore." Charlie nodded, pretending to be casually interested. "Bellamy silks, huh? I've heard of them. Supposed to be the best?" "Only the best," the man confirmed, taking a slow sip of his drink. His eyes flicked up, meeting Charlie's just for a moment. A brief, assessing glance that felt like a challenge. Charlie maintained his relaxed posture, continuing to play the role of a friendly bartender who understood when to keep things light. "I always figured those were out of my league." "But I guess when you know quality, you don't settle for less." The man's smile widened slightly, a thin line that didn't quite reach his eyes. The tie, the brand, the man's demeanor. It all fit. This was the man pulling the strings, the one connected to the murders. But Charlie knew better than to press further. He now had what he needed. Confirmation that this man was linked to Bellamy silks, the same brand tied to the murders. Now, he just had to wait for the right moment to act. The man finished his drink, gave Charlie a nod, and slipped back into the shadows of the speakeasy, disappearing as quietly as he had arrived. As the night drew to a close and the last patrons trickled out, Charlie slipped out the back of the speakeasy and made his way to a nearby payphone. He opened his currency and paid for a newspaper. The cool air was a welcome relief from the club's stifling atmosphere. The streets were still quiet, the city not yet awake. He dropped a coin into the slot and dialed Ray Dononiman's number. It didn't take long for Ray to answer, his voice thick with sleep, quickly sharpening when he recognized Charlie's voice. He spoke in a low tone. "I've got something for you. There's an illegal speakeasy at the Black Dahlia, and I think I've found the man behind the murders. The ties used to kill Laura and Vivian Hayes? The ties? They're Bellamy silks. Same brand as the one he wore tonight." Ray went silent for a moment, the kind of silence that signaled careful consideration. "You sure about this?" "I'm damn sure," Charlie replied, tightening his grip on the receiver. "He's the one, Ray. You need to move fast before he realizes what's coming." Ray let out a slow breath, his tone shifting to all business. "All right. We'll move on the place before he gets a chance to slip away. And we'll start with our first exercise, landing state of the shoulder, mind, and body. You stay clear." Charlie hung up, the weight of the night's events settling in. He'd done his part. He made his way to a small bar across the street from the Black Dahlia, a spot frequented by the early morning crowd, those wrapping up shifts, or those who never really slept. He ordered a whiskey neat and took a seat by the window, watching the entrance to the club. The minutes ticked by lazily, the first light of dawn creeping over the rooftops. Then, just as the sun began to rise, he spotted them, Ray and his team, moving in with purpose. The raid was swift, a blur of movement and the sound of shouts echoing down the street. Charlie observed as the police stormed the club, breaking through the facade that had concealed so much darkness. While he couldn't see the details from his vantage point, he didn't need to. He knew what was happening inside. Knew that the man with the tie had finally met his match. And there was he in the shadows, whose features were less monstrous than the other. When it was all over, Charlie downed the rest of his whiskey and left a tip on the table. He stepped out into the morning light, the city around him stirring to life. The hum of traffic and distant voices filled the air as he walked away, hands stuffed in his coat pockets. His thoughts drifted back to Laura and Vivian, two women who had dared to hope for something better, who had taken a risk, knowing the dangers. They hadn't made it. But their courage had brought down a man who believed himself untouchable. The city remained the same, a realm of shadows and secrets, where the powerful preyed on the weak, and hope was a rare, fragile thing. But for now, Charlie allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. He had made a difference, however small, in a city that rarely changed. He thought of Effie and how she had found the strength to help him stand against the darkness. Maybe it was time to pay her another visit. to see what could be rebuilt from the ashes of all they had torn down. Like the last drag of a cigarette. So, my friends, we close tonight's case and file it away. May your nights be calm, your drinks strong, and your thoughts just a little lighter. Keep your wits about you and watch your back. This city has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. Until next time, stay sharp and sleep well.